about a dream that I had that really changed my life. It starts off where I'm dead. It seems like a strange way to start a dream, as dead, but I'm taken up into the clouds. I can see heaven in front of me. I'm about to enter. Just one last thing. There's an angel in front of me, and the angel has a clipboard, and the angel tells me there at the gates, "I'm sorry, your name is not on the list." I was surprised to hear that. I was disturbed. In fact, I was actually in disbelief. I knew better. I know that my name's on the list. I knew something was wrong with this. And I was actually quite frustrated because the angel didn't seem to care other than just to check to see if my name was on the list. And since it wasn't, I obviously shouldn't be getting in. Well, the list is a reflection of the book of life. It was supposed to describe who all the citizens of heaven are, and I apparently was not one of them. Considering the stakes, considering that all of my life had been pointing towards this, it's one goal. And to have it interrupted by this clerical error right at the end just seemed outrageous to me. I knew what the stakes were. And I knew that I had to figure this out. So I thought maybe the angel thought I was someone else. Maybe that's it. Can I show you who I am? And all of a sudden, my life appeared between the two of us, just standing up there in the clouds. There was my life, or at least all the events, all the decisions, all those things that I'm proud of, what I would consider to be me. And it took the form of treasure. I was surprised to see it. I was surprised at how much. There was more than I thought. But the angel took a very casual glance, didn't seem to care, and just simply said, "I'm sorry, your name is not on the list." At this point, I'm very frustrated. Bureaucracy is kind of a pet peeve for me, and I thought, well, all right, you don't seem to respond to reason. Can I speak to your supervisor? As luck would have it, just then Jesus walks by. And I remember seeing Jesus. He just had this big, warm smile, always happy to bring peace to conflict. And I said, "Jesus, can you help me out?" And Jesus comes up to us. He looks at me with that big, warm smile, looked at the angel, looked back at me, and that smile fell flat. He said, "Do I know you?" And I woke up from that dream with a chill beyond the bones. It disturbed to my soul. And realized that all of my life I've been pursuing something else. And if Jesus didn't know me, nothing else mattered.
So Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name?' And I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" David had told me about that dream a while back, and I said, "You've got to tell that this week." And they're out of town this week. I said, "We've got to video this," because that's what this is talking about. I remember as a young man reading this verse and thinking, wait a minute. How can this possibly be? This goes against everything I had been taught in the church pretty much my whole life. I mean, when I was a youngster, I was taught, well, you say this little prayer and you're secure, everything's good, don't worry about anything, you're on the way to heaven. And I was a little older and I was taught, well, you better make sure you're baptized. That's a pretty big deal. Get baptized and then everything's going to be okay. And then I was taught, well, just keep your nose clean, just do the right stuff. Be active and involved in a local church and go to Sunday school and worship and Wednesday night, be involved in Bible studies and it was good to go. But here's Jesus standing on the hill in this Sermon on the Mount that we've been talking about for weeks now, standing up there, preaching to the people, telling him that, everybody who calls me Lord, not everyone who calls me Lord is going to enter the kingdom of heaven. Some of these people will be preachers who dedicated their entire lives to this message. I didn't know them. Some will be people who did miracles. Some will be people who cast out demons, all in the name of Jesus. And in a statement like that, when you read a statement like that, it kind of makes a person stop in their tracks. It did me. I hope it does you, if this isn't one you've read recently, and ask some pretty serious questions. How is it possible for a person to do everything right, follow the right God, teach the right things, do it all for all the right reasons, and still miss heaven? How is that possible? That messes with my theology. The answer boils down to 4 little words in verse 23 when Jesus said, I never knew you. I never knew you. He's not talking about an intellectual acknowledgement. I mean, he knows you, right? He knows your name. He knows how many hairs are on your head. He knows everything about you. He knows you. But this is talking about relationship. I never knew you as a denial of relationship. It is actually possible to do the things we've talked about these past several weeks, to live out a moral life like Jesus has talked about and described in the Sermon on the Mount, to spend your life teaching and learning about Jesus, doing all the religious activities, even things like feeding the hungry and caring for the poor and taking care of the widows and the orphans, things we talk about a lot around here. And it's possible to do all that and not actually have a relationship with Jesus. That's the danger. That's the warning. That's what Jesus is talking about here. That's the dream that shook Dave Herrick to the core and literally changed his life after that. When I was in college, one of the big names in the church world back then was a guy named Ben Merrill. He's still around and has a big name and everything, but he had a big church in California at the time, big mega church, and everyone was talked about him and his ministry and the stuff he was doing and how he grew this church, and he was just like down the road from Chuck Swindoll. That's a name you probably know from the 80s, and he's still around out there doing stuff too, but they were kind of, I hate to say competitors, anyway, they both had big churches in the same area. Now, I knew a lot about Ben Merrill. I had studied under his teaching. I actually took a class through Cincinnati Bible Seminary where he taught a class on leadership, and I learned a ton from that class, things that still impact me to this day. I have heard him preach a number of times. I've had conversations with him and the whole thing. Well, somewhere along the line, Ben moved from California to St. Louis, and just wanted a different challenge to see if I can do this in Missouri. If I can do it in California, you can just open up a door and say, come, and 1,000 people will come in California. Let's see if I can do it in Missouri. So he goes to Missouri, grows a big megachurch there, and everything's, big and strong and powerful and all that stuff there. One day we're on vacation, and we happen to be going through St. Louis, and I'm like, well, hey, we're in the area where Ben Merrill's preaching now. Why don't we stop by and see what that church, I've heard things about it, and heard the stories. Let's see what's going on. So we go, and we visit the church, and afterwards, this inspiring service and all that, afterwards, Ben's kind of standing in the corner in a hallway by himself. Just happens to be a moment like no one's around him, and he's just kind of observing what's going on. And Cheryl kind of nudges me in the side and says, go talk to Ben. I mean, because, I'd kind of talked to him up, hey, let's go hear Ben. He's just a big guy and everything, and I took a class and all this stuff. Here's what I learned from him. And she's nudging me, go talk to Ben. Introduce yourself to him. In theory, he kind of knows me because I took a class from him, but he probably, he knows thousands of people. Who am I, right? And part of me wanted to go talk to the guy. I mean, he's just kind of a celebrity preacher, and like I said, I could say, hey, remember that class you taught? And he'd go, no, So I respected him and I admired him and everything. But I didn't really know him, like know him, right? I couldn't tell you what his hobbies are. I couldn't tell you what his favorite foods are. Nothing like that. We had no real relationship. And I knew if I were to go up and introduce myself to him again, after I had done, a few years earlier, it would be this really awkward conversation. Even though I was a former student, even though I was a fan of his work, I'd probably go up and say something like, I like your church. I don't know what I would say. What do you say to someone you don't really know? Other than the small talk stuff. That's not relationship, that's small talk. I didn't want to know, I don't want to go up and just have another small talk conversation with the guy just because I was kind of a fan, of some of the stuff he had done. It just was weird, right? So I didn't do it, and we went on home. Now, wouldn't it be awful if that was your relationship with Jesus? You're not really in relationship with him. And he was like this guy off at a distance, right? He's inspired you, and he's taught you, and he's changed you, and he's influenced you, but you don't really know him, and he doesn't really know you. Wouldn't that be awful? I think this is where some of our best intentions can come back to haunt us if we're not careful. We think if I just know more about Jesus, then I will know him better, right? Just need to study him harder. I need to pray more and read more and study more and get together in big groups and little groups and isolate myself from the culture, and then we'll know Jesus better, right? Those all might be some good things and might be helpful things, but it's kind of like many of the things we've been talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. You can do the same things, one's from the head and one's from the heart, and Jesus always goes to the heart, doesn't he? He was always not impressed with the Pharisees who knew all the head knowledge, but much more impressed with the people who came at him with the heart. Because you can do all of those things, pray and study and go to small groups, and not even know Jesus. You can know about him, and you can answer all the questions on a test, and you can be the quickest one in the Bible quiz, but you may not know him. Be in relationship with him. I just finished reading a book that I found rather interesting. Speaking of Jesus, The Art of Not Evangelism. It was recommended to me, and Carl Maduris. And it was a fascinating read because it kind of stretches. I'm still processing it too, all right? But I'm gonna share some of the thoughts from this that I found intriguing, that I'm still in process. But I really liked where he was coming from in this. He starts out his book talking about this imaginary soccer team that you and I are on. We're all on this soccer team, right? And you and I are on Team Christian, right? And our opponent is known as like the rest of the world all-star team. And it includes people like Muslims and Hindus and secular humanists and atheists and all the people who you would not think of as a Christian person. So it could be just the person next door even. They're on the other team, and we're on Team Christian. And both sides are going at it. Both sides are trying to score goals against the other team. Each one's trying to win the game because the prize is a pretty big deal, right? And then you're in the middle of this game, and you're the goalie, right? You're the one who is guarding for all of Team Christian. You're guarding the goal to make sure that the Hindus and the Muslims and the atheists and the non-believer people don't score against you. You're guarding the goal, and then something unthinkable happens. This man in sandals comes walking across the field, and he's walking like right at you. He's not even part of the game. He just comes out of nowhere, and he's walking toward you, and the ref blows his whistle, and he starts running after the man to get him off the field. But just before the ref gets to the man looks right at you. And his eyes are on fire, right? And there's a passion about them. There's a power or something, compassion, something. We don't know what it is. But he looks right at you, and he calls your name, and he says, "Follow me." And then he keeps on walking and goes off the field. And you're sitting there guarding the goal thinking, this guy obviously doesn't get it. Don't you understand? We're in a big game here. We've got to win the game here, or it's all over. And besides, where is he going? Follow me? Where? What are you talking about? Who is this guy, and what does he think he's doing interrupting the game like this? But his eyes were piercing. There was something about him. And you do something absolutely crazy. You leave the game, and you run toward him, and you catch up to him, and you say, "Who are you? And where are you going?" And he looks at you, and he just says, "Come and see. Follow me." And you realize he doesn't seem all that concerned about the game that's being played. He's got something bigger going on. And as you go, you begin to realize that the game you were playing, that everybody seems to be playing, isn't the way. Jesus is the way. Now, the author goes on in his book to describe how we tend to view this church world that we're a part of, this and scoring goals and this whole thing. He said, if you draw a circle, right, and on the inside of the circle you draw a bunch of little dots, maybe you could put your name on one, hopefully. Anybody you look at and say, no, there's a strong Christian person, that name goes on the inside of the circle. They're strong Christian people. And hopefully you're there yourself. Then you draw some dots on the outside of the circle. These are people you know who are not solid Christians. They do all kinds of bad things like, smoke and drink and kick the dog and act like people who aren't inside the circle. They just act differently, right? They're not one of you, right? And we have been taught that our main goal in life is to bring people who are outside the circle inside the circle. We've drawn this boundary, and all that matters is that people get inside the circle. And so we use these megaphones while we're standing inside the circle, and we're screaming at people outside the circle saying, come on, get in the circle, get in the circle. You're going to die if you don't get in the circle. You're in big trouble. Get inside the circle. And they're staring at you like, what are you even talking about? What is going on? And some of them just kind of leave because they're like, who's the crazy person in the circle yelling at me? And you're assuming because people have left, maybe they can't hear you, so we scream a little louder. And we try fancy techniques, and we go to conferences and learn how to do it better and that whole thing. But the more we yell, the smaller the crowd on the outside of the circle gets because they're just simply, to be honest, being annoyed with us. Now, if you hang around, I might ask a few questions about the circle, but even then it gets really confusing because different people inside the circle have different answers to the questions. One person said, well, just repeat this prayer and you're in the circle. Somebody else says, oh, and don't forget, you have to be baptized and dipped in water to be a part of the circle. Matter of fact, we teach that here, right? That's how you get in the circle. And someone else says, well, you don't have to really do it that way. You can just splash some water on your forehead. And all these people have different answers. To the people outside the circle, they're going, what? And then someone else comes up and says, well, no, first you need to understand what the Trinity is. And you need to be able to understand and explain justification. And they have a long list of doctrines that you have to be able to explain before we'll really let you in the circle. We'll get you kind of close to the circle, but you can't get in until you can really answer all the questions that we have for you and learn all the content we think you need to know. And we begin this process of indoctrinate them with all the definitions and all the right beliefs. And through this, although those are all things we need to be doing, what we tend to do is we communicate that having the right thoughts, understanding the right doctrine, makes you part of the circle and is the means of salvation, not Jesus. There's a fine line that we can cross if we're not careful. And all of our focus is getting people to cross the border into the circle, which honestly they can do without Jesus. I can rattle off a few answers to some questions. I can feed some poor people, some hungry people. I can help some people out. And if that's all it takes, I can go through the motions and look like I'm part of the circle without being even familiar with who Jesus is. And Carl, the author of the book, asks, what if it isn't really like that? What if we've added a bunch of things to what Jesus intended? What if the circle in the game is something we created and in the religious world, and Jesus really didn't? What if it's more like this? Jesus is written in the center of your paper. And all around the center are people you know, a bunch of little dots. You're on there, your neighbor's on there. People going in different directions. There's some Muslims on there, some Hindus, atheists, people who don't believe at all. They're like going a completely different direction. They're headed somewhere totally different. And what if someone simply invites them to follow Jesus? See, here's the deal. Most people are okay with Jesus. It's the church they have troubles with. It's organized religion they have troubles with. But what if you're inviting them to follow Jesus? And so they start following Jesus. It kind of looks like this, with arrows starting to point in toward Jesus. They're headed a different direction now. Now, people are at different stages of life. Some people are closer to Jesus than others. That's not for us to measure or try to figure out. We're just pointing them to Jesus. We're teaching them the way. We're inviting them to follow along. Follow me as I follow Jesus. Let's learn about Jesus. And we all start following Jesus. Some of them may not even know what that means yet. And they don't know where they're going yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. And often, ultimately in the big scheme of things, where's Jesus leading me in my personal life, right? I mean, I'm learning more about him. The more I get to know him, the more I understand him, right? And they don't have to know everything about him. All they need to know is I'm following Jesus. Everything else will fall in place then. Sometimes we put the cart before the horse, is his point. Somewhere along the line, we have taken on God's job of trying to decide who's in the circle and who's not. And we run around making these judgment calls of who's in and who's out, when really God is the only one who ultimately knows that. And he's big enough to figure that out on himself. It's not our job. Our job is to make disciples. Our job is to invite people along for the journey. Would you like to follow Jesus? Would you like to follow Jesus? Would you like to know more about Jesus? That's our job. That's what we're told to do. So when we do that, someone like Matthew, who's a tax collector, and in a pretty crazy, sinful environment, will actually leave his lucrative job and his position behind and follow Jesus. Two brothers like Andrew and Peter, involved in a family business, would leave their business, their family behind and follow Jesus. They don't even know where they're going. They don't know what's ahead. All they know is they've just walked away from everything they've known because they're following Jesus. And so the question is, who knows Jesus more? Who does Jesus know more? The one in the circle doing all the right things, even for the right reasons, or the person who may be far from God who has turned now and has started heading in the right direction, figuring out what it means to follow Jesus. It seems like when Jesus was around doing his ministry, the people he was the hardest on were the ones in the circle. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the inner people. So did he know them better, or someone like a Zacchaeus who climbed up in a tree because he's wondering, who is this Jesus? And Jesus says, you, my friend, come on down, I'm going to your house. Radically changed his life. Jesus knew him. It's just unusual for me, but I want to do this. I want to read you a little story that finishes up the book. In this book I've read, I can read better sitting down, I think. We'll pretend we're at the library. And it's actually a pretty impactful story that really gives you the feel of what I'm talking about. I think I had to actually pause a couple times in reading this just to let it sink in when I did it the first time. So, and now I have it on the screen. You can follow it, or you can dream about daisies, whatever you want to do. But this is a great story. I was staying with friends. This is the author of the book, obviously, writing this. I was staying with friends at a hotel in Basra, Iraq, in the spring of 2003. While there, we managed to attract the curiosity of the hotel staff. They were curious about this team of international people staying at their hotel. Since the war was well underway, they were all more intrigued because we weren't wearing camouflage and toting M4 carbines. During the day out in the streets, we'd given out all of our texts, Arabic translations of the Gospel of Luke. We were checking in for another day, and as we stood in the lobby near the front desk, the hospitality manager leaned across the counter and looked at me. Why have you come here? He asked in English. Are you with the American Army? No, I said. We followed Jesus to Basra. So we're trying to find out what he's doing here. He took in his breath with a hiss. Issa? He asked, using the Muslim name for Jesus. Issa's in Basra? We think so, my friend Samir said. And he wants us to help out in any way we can. The manager made something like a gasping sound and snatched the phone off the cradle. He rattled off a quick sentence in Arabic, hung up, and came around to the front of the desk. If you please, he said, stay right here. I know you must be very busy, but I had to call my brother. He loves to hear about Issa. Samir and I looked at each other. Issa was in Basra, after all. Within a few seconds, 3 other men joined us, all of them in their 20s and 30s, wearing the dark blue uniform, suit of a hotel staff. For a moment, I wondered if they were going to ask us to leave. Then one of the men with black hair and a thickening mustache rushed forward and took my hand. He moved on down the line, shaking hands vigorously. His eyes lit up like candles. "You know about Esau?" he asked, returning to me. "Yes," I said in Arabic. We followed him here." "Oh my," his hand shut to his face. "Let me tell you something." He went on. "When I was a younger boy, a man came to our city and was telling stories about Esau to the people. The rest of the group and the hotel staff moved closer, listening intently. When this man left, he gave my father a cassette tape with recordings of the stories of Esau, the miracles, teachings of Esau, the people he talked to, and how he lived. "Wow," I said. "Every night for 10 years, my father would play the tape for me and my brothers and sisters. We played it until the tape did not work anymore." He stopped for a second, caught his breath. "I love the stories of Esau, and I miss them." "Well," I said, he cut me off, excited. "I've heard from my father and the old men of the city. They say there are books, sacred books, ancient books that tell stories of Esau as they happened by the friends of Esau. Is this true?" "Yes," I said. "As a matter of fact, we've been giving them out all day." He almost fainted. I could see his face color, then pale, then color again. He was vibrating with excitement. "Oh, please," he said as he gripped my hand. "You must find one for me. You must give me one. I have to have one." "All right," I said, and turned toward the elevator. "I'll see if I got one left." As I rode the elevator to my room, I realized I was nearly shaking from the same excitement. I almost never see someone who cares about the stories of Jesus like this man did. It's rare. Back in the States, sermons and teachings often revolve around doctrine, theology, and how to live a more fulfilled life. We seem to have forgotten the power and the humility and the sheer genius of Jesus, his vibrancy and his compassion. To the man in the hotel, Jesus was the ultimate folk hero, a person of mystery and influence. He was ecstatic about finding the stories of Jesus again. He was thirsty. When I speak in the States, so often the dialogue deteriorates to discussions about church planting, having a purposeful life, or the doctrinal differences between denominations. Sometimes it even goes as low as tithing and worship problems, or water immersion versus other methods of baptism. Almost never does anyone want to talk about Jesus, his stories, teachings, miracles, and compassion for sinners. Jesus isn't a folk hero in America. He's a lost relic, an artifact from another age. The elevator dinged and startled me out of my reverie. I needed to find this man a gospel, or he was going to pull his hair out. Or maybe the hotel rates would rise. Who knows? Anyway, we needed stories of Jesus like he needed water and air, and I wanted him to have one almost as bad as he needed one. I tore my room apart, ripped open the suitcases, threw my clothes all over the room, a shirt hung in the bathroom doorknob, a pair of socks stuck in the lamp. Finally, after scrambling around in my luggage like a miner digging for ore, I found one, a Gospel of Luke in Arabic. The title was something like The Gospel of Luke, a follower of Jesus. I snatched it, raced out of the room, and rushed for the lobby. I will never forget his face when I handed it to him. With tears on his cheeks, he held it reverently, lifted it to his forehead, closed his eyes. He lowered it to his lips, gave it a kiss, and then slowly opened it to look at the print. He lovingly ran his fingers over the pages and then bolted for the lobby desk. He picked up the phone, dialed rapidly, and spoke even faster. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "I had to call my father. He will know if these are the same stories of Esau as I heard before." We waited a few minutes, and after some time, an aging Iraqi man showed up, gray beard and all. He looked at us a little suspiciously at first and made his way over to his son, who was literally popping up and down with excitement. "Papa," he said, "these men have come here because they are followers of Esau. I told them about the stories of Esau on the tape and asked them if they had heard of the writings of the stories. They gave me one of them." The old man came closer, picked up the gospel, lifted it to its face. He read the title, thumbed through the pages, pausing to read here and there, and then he stopped, lifted the book to his lips, and kissed it, tears in the corners of his eyes. "Yes," he said, "this is it. These are the stories of Esau." He wrung our hands, hugging us to his body, so grateful that he shook. He says it's that way in many places in the Middle East. I've been flooded, mobbed, nearly crowded into the trunk of a car just for handing out these stories of Jesus to people who yearn for him as they should. So the question is, do you know him? I'm not saying can you answer a bunch of questions about him. Do you hunger and thirst for him like we talked about weeks ago in the beginning of the Sermon of the Mount. Is he part of your life? Is he part of your story? Have you moved beyond the knowledge of Jesus and into the relationship where you'll go anywhere he leads? You don't care. You're simply a follower. Whatever that means. You don't care. That is the kingdom that Jesus is calling us to.